one of the things that very often for us doesn't happen is to go, wait a minute, is there another way to do this?
Yeah.
Is there a better way? Now that we know what we know about learning and about how the brain works, and I mean, we just know so much more. Like, has anybody stopped to go, is this the best way to do this, or is this just a way to do this? And
Hi, Scott Cumro, Masters of the Musiverse here. Before we get started with this fantastic episode, I'd like you to take a moment right now and subscribe to the channel. There's so many people that watch and don't subscribe. 80% of the people that watch my content aren't subscribing right now. So let's get it done. Also, like this video because you are going to like this video. In the upcoming interview, we bring up David Newell's book, Teaching Rhythm. Boom, it's right there. I got it right by my side. I want to give a couple of these books away because it's so fantastic. So if you share this video on social media and tag Masters of the Musiverse or me, Scott Cumro, I'm going to enter you in the drawing. I should also mention, look at this throwback. I mean, it's a throwback from only a few months ago, really, before I changed the channel. My friend Leah Anderson made this great shirt for me. The last thing here before we go is I started a Patreon page. I'd love for you to check it out and either donate or let me know how it looks because I want to start generating money because these kind of giveaways, I want to be able to do this more for music educators. And the only way I could do that is if I got some money flowing in. So make that happen. So this interview, this is a shining example of why I'm doing this whole thing. Emile is a free rhythm program developed by Dr. Scott Jones of the Iowa State University, and this interview is amazing. We dig into the program, the research behind it, David Newell's book a little bit. We show you how everything works. Very exciting. Check it out.
I want to say this. Like we've been talking in the pre-interview about the David Newell book, and one of the things that he talks about in there, and I think it's in the preface, is that when he was thinking about things that his students didn't do well, he took the responsibility himself. And that I find is actually a really productive way to look at things because it feels more fixable and tangible. And the reason I'm bringing it up, because this is honest to goodness, so like what I would do when you live closer to me here in Minnesota, I would honestly go, what would Scott Jones do in this situation?
oh my goodness.
Well, I just respect you so much as an educator, and it's an honor for me to have you on here. And I've always wanted to share that with you, that I've really admired you as an educator. And I'm going to get one of those bracelets. It'll be WWSJD, right?
No. You are far too kind, Scott, and right back at you. It was so fun to be close to Fergus Falls, of course, when I was in Moorhead, and I have such respect and admiration for, the program that you're now leading, which has such a storied history. I mean, and at the end of the day, we're all in this together, and anything that we can do to help one another and bounce ideas off one another, I just think that's what we're called to be. So, So thank you. That's very kind. I'm delighted to be here.
All right. Well, we're going to be talking about this program, Emile, that you have developed. And I'm just wondering if you could give us like some kind of a summary of what Emile is.
Yeah, so Emile basically is a way that an educator, or for that much, really a student, could create a rhythmic slideshow using predetermined rhythm and rest combinations in a variety of meters as a way of kind of checking to see how your rhythm vocabulary and recall is in a really quick fashion. It can be done in such a way that it's very game-like, which is super engaging to students of all ages. But it can also be used in a really deeply embedded kind of philosophical approach to teaching rhythm, really, quite honestly, from elementary students all the way through college students as well. But maybe before getting too far into the weeds, it might just actually be fun for the viewers to just kind of get a sense for what's this look like in that kind of like game mode. So would it be helpful to show that video that we were talking about?
Yeah, we'll cut to that video right now. Thank you.
That sounds great.
Welcome to this demonstration of Emile. When I begin the show, you are going to be presented with a quick glance at some short rhythms I've selected for you. You will only have one count to take in the entire rhythm, so be on high alert. Your task is to then say the rhythm in time on a neutral syllable accurately. I will always give you a prompt before you begin. Enjoy! Ready, now, look and say. 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 Ready, now, look and say.
All right, so if you just watched that and didn't participate, I think you should go back and actually tap out the rhythms. And I think if you do that, you're going to really understand why this can be such a good tool. And so let's talk about why do it this way, Scott? Why would you change the way you're doing rhythm and go to this approach?
Yeah, well, as we were talking and as we've talked before, I think to me, one of the big kind of philosophical groundings for me as a teacher, like it is, I think, for many of us in music education, is trying to teach our students in such a way that they become independent, that they don't need us. And so, if I had it to choose all along, I've always wanted to give and impart skills in my students so that when they then see a brand new piece of music or they find themselves in a situation they've not been in before, that they can navigate that without needing help from me. And most importantly, to feel that sense of satisfaction that I don't need anybody to tell me what I just did. I know it's right, which is so insanely motivating to all of us, right? Where you don't need to have somebody else say, was that right? I don't know. Was it okay? But that deep down feeling of like, I know that what I just did is spot on. And that just increases your appetite and hunger to want to do even more, which then motivates students to want to do more and to get better and to understand more complex things. So it was really born out of that kind of fascination that I've had with teaching for musical independence. Intonation was kind of my first area of exploration during my doctoral study at the University of Minnesota. And then this one has always been spooled in the back of my mind. And when I came to Ohio State, there were some resources available to actually contact some software developers and and to bring some people and resources together to say, all right, I've had this idea in my mind. How do we do this? And fortunate enough to have some colleagues who were really able to and willing to help make this all happen. So that's kind of where it was born. What it really, though, is just an updated kind of 21st century version of rhythm flashcards that James Froseth created a long time ago. As a matter of fact, you can still buy these rhythm flashcards at GIA Music. But the problem with them is, they're only so big. And if you've got a room of 120 students, these flashcards, they're just not big enough for everybody to see. But the way that technology has improved in most all of our classrooms, where everybody's got an LCD projector and the ability to show on giant screens for our students or monitors, that makes this kind of technology, I think, much more effective than those rhythm flashcards in that way. So that's a little bit about where it comes from. I think what's really interesting about this, to harken back to conversations that you and I again have had in the past, is that I think rhythm is one of the aspects of teaching that a lot of us talk about, like, gosh, my students just really struggle, or that middle of the road and lower ability student, that lower functioning student that's kind of struggling with some things to get their footing. Gosh, they just don't seem to get this rhythm thing. And I've tried giving them worksheets and I'm trying all this stuff and I'm asking other colleagues and nothing quite seems to be sticking or helping them find their way. And at the end of the day, we actually have research that's existed a long time that has kind of given us the ability to understand how best to do this. But what many of us are just doing is teaching the way that our cooperating teachers, when we taught rhythm, And other colleagues are like, well, I do these worksheets and I have them count and I have them clap and I have them do, and not that any of that's bad, but at some point, I think, given the limited time that we all have, we probably should be saying, hey, is there a more efficient and effective way to do this? And if so, that's what I need to do, because there just isn't enough, there aren't enough hours in the day to make this all happen. So it's partly embedded in that kind of thinking as well.
Yeah, I think it would be good. I've got Emile up on my screen. If
Oh yeah,
I shared that and we kind of walk through like
sure.
how we would maybe put this together. So I'm gonna
Yeah,
and then you can walk me through. How does that sound?
sure. Yeah, that sounds great. Happy to do so.
Are you
And
seeing?
I sure am, yeah. And I should mention that this is a work in progress, because my full-time job is teaching at Ohio State, and this is kind of on the side. So usually in the summers, there's a number of updates that happen, and that'll be happening again this summer. But one of the things that'll eventually be here on this homepage where you are right now is some information that says, hey, here are the ways you can do this, some videos and some additional kind of information that will help guide through. So what we'll do together is kind of what eventually will be there on the website, I hope by midsummer here 21.
So I've logged into my account ahead of time, my Gmail. You
Yeah.
don't actually have to log in. It enables you to like save it your shows, right?
That's right. If you on the account tab there, if you click in on that and log in using your Gmail credentials, which most teachers have, and of course, as you know, that's a free thing. There's no charge there. What that enables a user of Emile to do is to save any of the slideshows you create. You then can give them a unique name, store them in whatever folder structure you want on your computer, and then import them again for use in a class the next week or the next month, or for that much, the next year.
Yeah.
So that's the only benefit to signing in. Otherwise, it's fully functional without that. It's just nice to sometimes be able to save your work.
It is, yeah. And I just started recently. I've been using the program for about a month now, and
Oh, great.
just getting used to it. And then I now, okay, this is my level 1 for my 5th grade, so I started saving those.
Perfect. Yeah. It's like anything we do. I think you eventually find the best way for you to organize your materials for your class and your teaching. So should we assume that you want to create a show from scratch?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right, so click on the Create tab. And what this will open in the settings window here at the top, you have your option to select a time signature. If you'll just click in the 4/4 time box, that'll open a pull-down menu. And this right now are the time signatures that are available for you to create a rhythm slideshow in. So if you mentioned 5th graders, and if you're working in 4/4 time, we can certainly stay there. But if you also wanted to do a different time signature, later on, you can as well. The next thing you see, there's a metronome, which you can adjust actually at a variety of different moments in creating your show. So we can leave it right there, or if you want to slow it down and set it, that's fine. You can always go back and adjust it in a number of ways. There's a subdivision, if that's helpful. For sometimes and teachers it is, and for others it's not. That's also something you can turn on and off and change in a variety of moments. And then this playback options menu here, there basically are 2 modes or 2 gears. The automatic mode is the one that viewers just watched the video that I narrated about, like, okay, here's how it works. And that's kind of that game-like mode. You can also create a show and put it into manual mode, which puts you as the teacher in charge of when you advance to the next slide in a show. And if you want to back up or to move forward or turn the metronome on or off, it's a great kind of almost teaching mode if at some point in time you find that the slides you've created, it would actually be better to have in front of your students for a longer period of time or sustained period of time.
Yeah, can I just jump in real quick? And
yeah,
this might be getting too into the weeds of some other theory, but I'm reading David Newell's book, Teaching Rhythm, and I'm realizing that I want to be teaching some of these rhythm ideas orally first.
Yes.
And so the way I'm planning on using this is to do that orally, and then the next step, having it go to the manual setting so the kids can have a little bit more time to look at the rhythm.
Right.
And then add those into like an automatic. Is that an okay system?
Oh yeah. As a matter of fact, I think it would be interesting maybe for our conversation to look at both ways of using this. So for one kind of teacher, I'll say, for instance, you could create these shows that would just be these game-like experiences that would kind of help break up and invigorate part of your classroom teaching. I think another kind of teacher would be really interested in using Emile as part of a more comprehensive approach, as we were referring to earlier. What's the research that we have on just teaching rhythm and developing a rich rhythm vocabulary in the minds of my students? And in that case, the manual mode becomes very helpful, in particular in steps 3 and 4 of David Newell's process. And we can actually get into that a little bit more later as well. Because David's book is brilliant for a teacher who really is like, you know what, I just need to find a better way to teach my students rhythm, because it's not, what I'm doing is okay at best.
Yeah.
And it's a really great tool.
Okay, so then we'll leave it on automatic for now, and then come back and do manual. And then, so you were going to explain the display rhythm section.
Yeah, so your viewers, in the sample they just saw a moment ago, there was, I think it was just one count that you had to look at it, which is probably the most advanced way to do that. And that was right on count 3, that ready, now, look and say, or look and play. And so if you think those words with those numbers, ready is 1, now is 2, look is 3, and that's the box that's checked. So that's the count it would show on. And then play, the slide goes away. If you wanted to leave it up for a second beat, it logically makes sense to go ahead and click maybe count 4. So if these are younger students that you wanted to do that, that could be that way. You could also set it up to say ready, look, and play, and 2, 3, and 4 would be available. So you have some variety, and anything you create, you can go back into this create tab and edit before you save it. So there's lots of flexibility to back up. And so almost anything you create now, we can go back and change later.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm assuming if I go to like 6, I've actually not ever done that before. It's going to give me all.
Yeah. So there's always 4 counts between each slide.
Okay.
And so in 6/8 time, that will be 2 measures of 6/8 time. And then this would be the same thing. That would be measure 1, beat 1, measure 1, beat 2, measure 2, beat 1, measure 2, beat 2.
Sure.
So that would be ready, now, look, and play.
Yes. Okay. I got it.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm going to go back to 4/4 for our purposes.
Sure. Okay. All right. So what might be helpful just for viewers is go ahead and collapse right where it says half notes and quarter notes. Collapse that box, collapse this next one, and then you can scroll down. So this right now is how all of the library of slides are organized. We just tried to come up with a way to describe what the combinations of note values and their rest equivalents are kind of grouped together. So if Scott, if you want to make a choice, like thinking about, again, your 5th graders, if you want, about rhythms that you in your work with them might be working on and coming up to, maybe it's rhythms that you've been working on and you're kind of like, hey, I want to create a slideshow that would kind of be this fun way of checking and seeing like, okay, how are they really doing with this stuff? Are they just kind of mimicking kind of one another, or do they really understand this?
Okay,
so
we're doing a lot of work with 8th notes now.
Fabulous. And what this does is this just opens some slides right away. You can load more, you can actually load all of them. And every time you click that little plus button, the slide is going to populate in this window above. And you can duplicate those. So if you want 2 of those, you can just click another one and it'll be there. We can, again, move them around later. So you can just kind of go through and pick slides that you think would be helpful for your students. And at any point in time, when you think like, oh, I think I'm good, you can just scroll up or add more. Exactly.
Am I getting ahead of you? Sorry, I like to play.
No, you're doing great. As a matter of fact, this is kind of the fun part of technology like this, is you just get in there and kind of monkey around a little bit and just try some things. Yep. And you're not going to break anything.
I do love how easy this is to slide things around. I mean, it's super user friendly.
That's good to hear, because the drag and drop feature is a relatively new update. It used to be that you just have to click on those arrows to slide them left or right, and we just found that to be a little wonky. The minus sign deletes a slide. The plus sign duplicates that slide.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can just kind of move things around in whatever way you'd like. Nice. Look at you. You're a pro.
We'll see. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's all great. And there's, we may not have necessarily time for this later, but as you start to do more of this with your students, you start to realize like, okay, of these 7 rhythm slides, what order makes sense? Like, for instance, if you were working with really, you're earlier in the academic year, let's say, like slide number 6, the 4 quarter note slide, that might be a great first slide. where
Yeah.
they're just like something that's like a pitch, pitch right across the middle of the plate, that everybody's just going to be on the same place. And there's a certain kind of moment where then if you increase the complexity as they go, you can be aware as students are playing and kind of monitoring what's happening in the room to get a sense for like, okay, at what point does this start to get a little dicey for them, and what concept does it seem to be that they're wrestling with? And that gives you information to adjust some of your teaching. So there's all kinds of things that you can explore and think about with this.
All right.
So you like the order you got?
I'm comfortable with it. Yeah.
Lovely. Okay, so then next step would just be you go ahead and you create show, the blue button, right? And what this is going to do is it opens this window. Now, right now it looks like, where did everything go? But this is basically the window that everything that's about to happen is going to happen in. The little play arrow box at the bottom will start the show. And because, again, we've got this in automatic mode, it's just going to run. So you'll click that and it will just go right off the bat. And we can kind of take a look. It looks like you've got subdivisions set there. It looks like we're set to go at about 80.
I had to change my sharing. I didn't have the audio on, so I'll give it a click here.
And the students would then play during these 4 counts, right? This would be ready, now, look and play, and they do da, 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 da.
Yeah, that, I was surprised at how quick the students learned it too. Like it didn't a whole lot of explanation. I just started playing it and they picked up on it. It took a few measures worth, but they really did pick up on it quick. And these are beginners. These are 5th graders.
Oh, that's great to know. Yeah, it's very game-like with them. And they have you ever played that card game Concentration or the board game Concentration with like young students who maybe aren't even reading yet? Where they just have to memorize where was the flower, where's the carrot, where's the orange ball, and their memories are just insanely strong. And anything that's game like, boy, it gets those little brains just firing at them, those neurons firing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. They catch on really quickly.
Yeah. Sometimes it's like we got to get out of their way and let them experiment. And once we provide something like this for them.
Yeah, for sure.
So
let's suppose that at the end of this, you decided like, okay, so I think I want to save this show, or I want to go back in and make some adjustments to it. You could go back and click on the Create tab again, and that'll take you back to where you started. And so there's your show. And if you wanted to make any more adjustments, you could make those adjustments, or you could just go, no, I'm going to save this for now. And then this would be Export Show. And what will happen when you click that way, and everybody's browsers is a little bit different. Right. You see that for your browser, it appears right there. And the default name for that file right there is 4_4.show, but you can change that to whatever label you want to use. So if this is 5th graders, period 4, or kind of whatever you call that, you would just go ahead and change the first part of that. Most teachers have found that leaving the .show helps them understand like, oh, that's an Emile file.
Okay.
So they leave that, but whatever you wanted to call that.
Just call it the test.
Perfect. Now, sometimes what's a little confusing is there are people that will double click on that file and think that will take them right, like it'll just open and Emile will pop up and you're ready to go. In order to get that file, and this might be good to do, go ahead and do the clear all there for a moment. All right, so now we've got no rhythms from our library in that window, but let's suppose you want to navigate to that show you just saved. So now what you just do is go to the Import Show button, right? And that'll open up this. You just then have to navigate yourself to that file that you created, which is right there, and then click Open, and poof, there it is.
All right.
So that's what importing is about. And that's the way that you would, if you were using this slideshow with your students, you would want to have that, queued up and ready to go, or all of the shows that you're going to use in your class that day, just queued up and ready to go as well, so that turnaround time is pretty easy.
Yep. Something probably to point out is if I start this one up and I'm like, you know what, I want to add this and this in. Yeah. I would now need to export that show again. It's not going to save that file.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's very good to be mindful of. That's a great point, and maybe something, as a matter of fact, I'll jot myself a note about that. Maybe that's something that we should look at to seeing if there's a way to do a save, kind of an auto save feature it's been so interesting to learn about the back end of software and technology that way. And it's amazing what can be done. It's also amazing sometimes how much work it takes to get that done. So, so I'll jot a note about that. Autosave, great.
Well, and so I think that if you agree, should we go back and talk about the manual setting and look at
Yeah.
that? Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that in relation to kind of the more embedded approach to using Emile, or should we just use it in this way? What would you like to do?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to talk about that, the idea of like maybe the process that I
Cool.
can use. So I'll click on manual here and then go
Okay.
to create show.
Yeah, absolutely. So in this mode, and quite honestly, I find, Scott, that having a little clicker for my laptop in the classroom, so I can be anywhere in the classroom and start and stop this show, it's designed to do that. So I should say that Emile is right now most stable in Safari, that browser.
Okay.
But with those little remote clickers that you can use, and some of them have the little LED pointer so that you can use that to, point to something on your whiteboard, no matter where you are in the classroom. You could be standing back in the fourth row of the ensemble and start and stop the metronome, advance and back up. And I think those clickers, gosh, I think the one I have is a Logitech, and I think it was like $35 on Amazon. It just kind of plugs into this side of the computer. Super helpful tool. And that's where you then don't have to be tethered to the laptop itself to start and stop things. It's nice to just be able to float around. So let's suppose that you decided, okay, I want to start the metronome, but I don't want them to see the first slide. You would just go ahead and start that. And it might just be that you want with your students to say, hey, let's get our feet tapping, that kind of a thing. And then by clicking the forward arrow, that slide is going to stay there until you click that forward arrow or the back arrow again. Exactly. So you've got all the time in the world to do that. And there's always a blank slide in between each of the slides you've added in your show. So it can be kind of nice that way. You could have then a conversation about these 4 quarter notes. You could ask a student, call on some students to answer some questions about the quarter notes if you wanted to. You could leave the metronome off and advance to the next slide if you want, just on your own to explore some additional
So metronome
things.
doesn't have to be on, okay?
Yeah, and some teachers have told me that they found this to be helpful to just have a way for the whole class to look at a rhythm rather than, okay, everybody look at line 17 on page 9, and then some students, who just weren't quite with you, and so now somebody's confused and lost, and everybody's like, okay, everybody look up at the screen, and you can tell if they're all looking. It's just a lot easier way to make sure everybody's with you. In that way.
So yeah, can we talk a little bit more about maybe the process of teaching? Like if let's say I know that I'm going to be teaching eighth notes to my kids.
Yeah.
Can we talk about a process to introduce it?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see, we can get just a little bit nerdy to start with. So if we back all the way up to Ed Gordon, and this is a book, let's see, I'll try to make sure it's not glare. So this Learning Sequence of Music by Ed Gordon. Ed Gordon, longtime faculty member at Temple University, passed in 2015, so no longer with us. And all of his materials are now at the University of South Carolina in Columbia. Ed Gordon created this book, Learning Sequences Music, which is basically all of the really heady stuff about here's how to sequence instruction in all of the dimensions of music. So tonality is in there, rhythm is in there, but I have to tell you, it's a little bit of a dense read. He was a brilliant man. This is a really pivotal book, continues to be, but it's a little hard to get through. But he kind of got us thinking this way professionally. Along then came a gentleman we've already mentioned, James Froseth, faculty emeritus at the University of Michigan, still with us. And he took some of Ed Gordon's materials and created resources, books, method books that we as practicing teachers could use, many of which are still available for purchase. Jump Right In is one of his methods, recorder methods as well. And he took a lot of Gordon's concepts and put those into play in materials that you and I could be using in our classroom. Then you've mentioned David Newell several times. So this is that book, Teaching Rhythm. And David Newell, retired middle school band director in the state of Minnesota. In the state of Ohio. I'm getting my state scooped up. And David retired from teaching, was extraordinarily successful in what he did. And with the time that he had on his hands early in retirement, said, I want to just share with other teachers the stuff that I figured out in the course of my 30 years. And Chose was kind enough to pick up that book and agree to publish it. And it is a brilliant way of saying, here's a classroom teacher's spin on how to approach implementing Gordon and Froseth in your day-to-day teaching. And quite honestly, some of this theory even backs up further than that. I mean, Pestalozzi, I mean, if we go really far back, this is like 17th and 18th century thinking in some regards. But David's book makes it really approachable, really readable, and I think puts a spin on it that most of us who teach go, oh, I get it now. I see how you might do this. And so David's got 5 steps. So learning any rhythm, the very first step is perform it. And that's the one that seems like, wait, what? That's the first thing you do? And so to use your example of, okay, I'm gonna start my students with understand what eighth notes are. Before they even see eighth notes, what you as a teacher would do, and of course you know this because you've been reading David's book, is you would just do some echo sequences. I play, you play. So you get everybody's feet tapping, and you go, hey everybody, I play, you play. And you might do da, 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 and the class goes da, 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 da. You might do da, 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 and they would echo back to you in that way. And so for about 30 or 45 seconds, you would just play that game with them, different combinations of eighth notes. They have no idea what an eighth note is. They have no idea what it looks like yet. You're just playing a little game. And the constant in that moment would be making sure that feet are tapping. Now, can we do a quick pause and have a quick aside about the foot tapping thing?
Yeah.
Because this is a thing, I got to tell you. I am fascinated that there are sometimes educators who have skipped over that step of requiring their students to tap their feet. And I get it, because there's some students who aren't good at it. And very often we don't want to remind our students that, hey, you're struggling. And so like, well, okay, don't worry about that for now. But the problem is that what makes rhythm is its sound against a pulse. And if a student can't demonstrate what pulse they're feeling, we have no idea if they really do understand eighth notes, which is really 2 sounds evenly against 1 pulse. So for instance, the game that I like to play, like if I'm presenting at a conference or having a conversation like this, is to say, okay, everybody in the room, tell me what kind of notes these are: quarter, eighth, 16ths, the 30 seconds. And here's the sounds. Da 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 da. And of course, it's like, well, somebody always goes, oh, those are 16th notes. We're like, well, yeah, that's if you're doing da 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 da, that works. But what if I'm doing da 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 da? Now they're eighth notes. What if I'm doing da 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 da? Now they're in compound time. They're triplet. So pulse is huge. It really is. And I think that all of us should get over the worry about a concert having foot tapping sounds in it. Who cares? I mean, really, at the end of the day, like, that's learning in action. But I think sometimes we get in our own way of teaching by shortcutting or taking out these really critical steps. And for young students, as well as older students, that idea of showing the pulse they're feeling is really important for us to know if they're getting it. So all of that to be said, at all times while rhythm learning is going on, I think tapping their feet is really important. So the first step is they get to perform it. The second step, according to David's strategy here in his book, is to count it. And this is pretty huge. So the rhythms that I've been just doing, I play, you play, or I say, you say, I'm now going to do those same rhythms, but I'm going to use the counting system that I believe in. So I might do, hey, everybody, I say, you say, and I would do da, 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 and the students da, da, and then I'm going to do that same rhythm, and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and 4, 2, 3, and 4. Good. 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3. And what this step is about, and Scott, I have to tell you, I never thought about this until I read David's book, is there are a ton of our students who don't realize that da, 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 and 1, 2, 3, and 4 are the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, they just don't connect that. Like, to them, all this counting stuff is just worksheet stuff. And the whole point is, like, it's just another way of saying these rhythms rather than on da, or playing them on, whatever instrument they play. Yeah. So it's a pretty important step. And for teachers like you and for others who are using the system, what you can also do in the step 2 is go, hey, I'm now going to make sure my students are catching on. Hey, everybody, I say you count. And so I might do da, 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 da. And what I'm hoping to hear them do is 1 and 2 and 3, 4, to help them understand that, like, oh yeah, these are the same things, just another way of saying them.
I'm writing that down. My fifth
Yeah,
grade practice on Wednesday.
it's brilliant. I mean, it really, David's book is so helpful that way.
And
so
just,
then yeah, go ahead.
Really quick. At this point in time, I would not have, if I'm in the count it stage, don't have the music up yet, right?
Right. So this is like maybe weeks before they're going to see these rhythms in print.
Yeah.
And we can maybe come back after we get through his 5 steps. We could go back and talk about the explore the reading, literary vocabulary process that this is really based on, because I think the parallels between learning to read and learning to read rhythms are really similar. And when you stop and think about it, it's like, oh yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We'll go on in the steps now. So we're at see it.
Yeah. So now we're at see it, and this is where Emile in the manual mode would come into play. So let's suppose, like, just for fun, how about advancing this show that you're doing now, Scott, and let's see what this slide is. So let's suppose that this is a slide that this is a rhythm that for a couple of weeks you were doing just by ear. I say, you say, I play, you play. You then went to step 2 with this rhythm because they seemed comfortable with it. And so you've been doing some counting with this rhythm. And you've been doing I say, you count, I play, you count, I count, you play, just kind of anything to kind of make sure that they're understanding that there's a way to count this. And then there's this day where these rhythms that they've learned how to play by ear and also how to count, they're now going to see the grouping, the entire measure's worth of rhythm to go, hey, this thing that you already know and that you know how to do a couple of different ways, here's what that looks like. And so in manual mode, what you might do is you might go, hey, everybody, I play, you play. And the slide would be blank first. So maybe back up a slide. And so the screen in the front of the room is blank. And I might go, da, 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 da. And just as they start to play, I advance this slide. So while they're playing this rhythm, they're now seeing this pattern. And the goal is to help them not look at these individual 4 notes, but to look at the whole thing, the entire grouping of rhythms, and going, what you're playing and what you're seeing, that group, that's one and the same. And that's the really powerful part of this, that if they are comfortable enough with these patterns, that seeing them is this, it's one thing to memorize, it's not 4 things. It's just one thing. And for all of us, and of course, you know this, and people watching, you know this as well, this is how informed independent musicians think. They don't look at every note, they look for patterns. They spool them in their brain and they move on.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I've received affirmation just today that these first 3 steps work so well, because I try to skip them because I didn't know them about a month ago, because I'm just getting into this book, and I tried to get into more complicated rhythmic things with my 5th graders. It was a train wreck.
Yeah.
And then now I've been having them do the rhythms orally, and they're doing much more complicated rhythms than I was before. And so now we're starting to ease into reading those more complicated rhythms, and it's like, so I'm already a believer. That's why we're here talking about this, but just a short story on the success of it. So,
well, I'm glad that you're sorting through that. And like, you know, like most new things for all of us who try new things, you know, sometimes something doesn't go well, and that usually causes us to go, wait a minute, okay, why didn't that go well? Oh, right. You know, so what's that, you know, the whole goal is to fail fast, right? Have lots of failures early so you figure it out and then get better. It's like, it's just how learning works. Okay, so we've got ourselves now through step 3, which is the see it. Then Emile in the automatic mode would be David's step 4, which is test it. And when you put Emile in automatic mode, kind of hearkening back to that demo that we shared earlier with your viewers, what that's really about is going, okay, I'm pretty sure as a teacher that my students have got these rhythms in their brain, these patterns, but I'm now going to double check to make sure by creating a show that's just going to go in automatic mode. And I'm going to use all of these rhythms that we've been working on for the last several weeks, first by ear, then by counting, then by seeing them. And now I'm going to just jumble these up, put maybe 7 or 8 slides in a row, and I'm going to press play and watch and see what happens. We've got construction going on at the house next door. So that if you hear any sounds of sawing and all kinds of stuff going on, that's what's happening. So in any case, what that step 4 is this idea of testing it. And this is where Emile really comes in handy, because you can create these tests, you can have your clicker, you can push play, and then you just get to monitor what's happening in the room. And you can look around the room at students for foot tapping. You can keep an eye on the students that you know are maybe kind of struggling a bit, and gauge depending on where and what success they have. And if you've created your show in kind of an increasing difficulty, you can get a sense for where is the class with this grouping of rhythms that we're working on, and where might I need to go back a step in my teaching to step 3 and shore them up a little bit more to get a sense for where they are. Now, all the while, they're just playing a game. So quite honestly, the students, I mean, be ready for your students to be like on the edge of their seats and to want to do these things over and over and over again, because it's really, it can be very addictive if the rhythms that you've got in the show meet the students where they are. It's a lot of fun.
I shared this with you in the pre-interview that I think it was in the pre-interview, or maybe I'm telling viewers twice, that we've been using Emile a bunch, and then I didn't use it one day last week, and I got called out. Trombone player raises his hand. He goes, "Where is Emile? We haven't done Emile yet," and they
Nice.
won. So like you said, it's a game.
That's awesome. I'm glad to know that they're thinking of it that way. That's good. And of course, anytime our students think they're playing a game, but you and I both know that they're learning really important stuff, that's a major win for sure. Good. So that gets us to step 4. And then step 5 for David, and we really don't have to get too much into the weeds with this, but that's like a deep level of understanding. And his 5th step is understand it. And the way that might play itself out in your classroom might be doing some rhythmic dictation. So not only have your students become so comfortable with these patterns, but they understand those patterns deeply enough that I could say, hey, everybody, I'm going to play you a rhythm. I want you to grab your pencils, or I want you to grab your iPad pencils, and I want you to notate the rhythm, what it would look like. And I'll give it to you 3 times. So here we go. And then you would do that. That skill is an extraordinarily complex one. Like the ability to do that well and accurately takes a lot of insight and a lot of maturity and depth of thinking. What's really interesting, Scott, and you know this because you're familiar with David's book, is that very often that's the first step that many of us go to. Like, a student struggles with rhythm, and what we want to do is go into all of this depth about this. Okay, now, hey, 16th notes, there's 4 of them in a quarter note, and a quarter note's 1, there's 2 of those in a half note. We start talking about all these relationships, and these brains of our students go. Wow. And David's point is like, hey, that's the last level. That's the deepest level of learning. Get them back to, I play, you play. Let's play a game. Let's figure this out. So I think David's book and those 5 steps are just, they're easy to remember. And it causes us to have to organize our teaching a little bit differently, though, if you're really going to buy into this. Yes. But it's really just that. It's just reorganization. It's nothing. It's not having to reinvent the wheel or learn another language or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, the second I was reading his book, I'm like, yep, I'm that teacher that's been doing it this way, and this new way makes more sense. And so I'm already experimenting with it and making, fast mistakes, like fast failures, I think you call it right now. And,
right.
But it's a good change. I'm really excited to get through the book and keep on doing that.
Yeah. Do you want to explore this language literacy thing for a moment, or do you want to move on to some other stuff?
I think that was one of the most compelling things when I first heard you speak about Emile. It's like almost painfully obvious once you talk about this. So yes, take a moment.
Well, David makes this point in his book, and I think it's well founded. So there are some incredible parallels between whole language learning and this way of learning rhythm. And so I like to use the analogy, like, so let's just take any small child and we'll call her Elizabeth. So Elizabeth is a young infant being raised by loving people in her home. And at some point, those loving people have decided to connect Elizabeth and her understanding of what this thing called a dog is. And so maybe they've got a dog in their home. And at some point, they just kind of get Elizabeth to say the word dog and to associate this thing. So it's dog. And she struggles a little bit at first, but with enough repetition, becomes comfortable with saying dog. And then connecting that word that she's saying to this thing that lives in the house that has a tail and four legs and is brown and fun to kind of play with. And with enough repetition and hands-on experience, Elizabeth becomes really comfortable with understanding that dog, this thing I say, now I'm not reading it, I'm just saying this thing, that sound and this thing that I like playing with and petting and snuggling with on the couch, that's one and the same. So lots of experience with that. And over time, Elizabeth's parents help her understand that there are different kinds of dogs. So it gets to the point where Elizabeth understands that dog is not just that dog, but our neighbors have a dog and it's got black and white spots and it's got a different name, but that's a kind of dog as well. And with more experience with dogs and petting dogs and meeting dogs, even in the car, Elizabeth can look out the window and go, dog, by just seeing one, even for a short second. And parents go, right, Elizabeth, that's a dog, right? And so she's having a lot of experience with what a dog is before actually learning how to read the three letters that represent dog. Then comes this magical day where one of her parents or a teacher at school decides, I'm now going to connect the three letters in this specific order that stand for this thing which you already know well, that you already have a ton of experience with. And in doing so, your brain just needs to go, these three letters in this order and this thing that you know a lot and have experienced in your life already, it's one and the same. And Elizabeth's little brain goes, boop, got it. And it's not just got it for the moment, it's like, I got it. Like it's there. And so there might be a book about a dog and parents and teachers are showing this word is dog and there's a picture of a dog. And so they can point and say, where's the dog? There's the dog and read this to me. And then they might give a different book after a while to Elizabeth which also is about a dog, but has different pictures and words in a slightly different order. It's kind of like that whole, like, let's test and make sure that she's just not saying she's memorized the story and she's just spitting it back to me. So they check to make sure that eventually that three-letter word and this thing that she knows, that's really, she's associated those two things as one thing. This symbol stands for this thing that I know. And then with time, of course, Elizabeth can read more complex sentences and paragraphs about dogs and then be asked questions about them. Now, tell me more about the dog that you read in the first paragraph. And what was the issue with where it buried the bone? And what was and so that's that like fifth step. That's deep understanding and comprehension that comes with time. And of course, the parallels for us in rhythm sequence learning that we just talked about are like, duh, yeah. Right? So just dog, right? Pet the dog, gets lots of experience with this thing first, and then later be presented with the symbols that stand for this thing that they know. And most of us not realizing it, we just introduce the symbols at the same time they're learning the rhythms way too soon. This is way too soon. But it's what most of us kind of grew up with. And it's what I remember my practice teaching, my student teaching supervisor. I mean, I learned a ton from them, but that's what we learned. You pass out a new piece of music and you pass out the rhythm sheet at the same time. Yeah. And it's just too close in proximity. Then no wonder it doesn't go well, or no wonder nothing transfers.
Yeah.
So yeah, those parallels are really strong, I think.
And don't you think we extend this to like other aspects of playing? Like because I'm calling myself out now as I sometimes am teaching the technique that's in the song and not the technique first. And so like I'm starting to think about, okay, how do I get ahead of myself?
Right.
So not just with rhythm, but maybe it's a chromatic fingering on a saxophone piece or something like that. And so get ahead of the technique. And we're maybe a little bit better with technique because we do tend to teach that a little more thoroughly.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And relatedly, and this is maybe a topic for a different discussion, and of course, I'm happy to hang with you anytime. But I think that broadly speaking, so this means it's not going to apply in every classroom, but broadly speaking, we spend too much time in a rehearsal period on repertoire and not enough time on skills and conceptual understanding. And so what happens, and I think, quite honestly, I think some of it comes because we don't trust that we have the ability to make stuff that is in and of itself really boring, super engaging to our students. I think we don't trust ourselves, quite honestly, deeply. It's like, well, I can't teach rhythm and keep kids' attention for 20 minutes. It's like, sure you can. You can totally do that. You just have to think about, how do I sequence this? And this is where I think David's book is masterful, because now I've basically got these little short things that I could be doing with students in my rhythm part of foundations, my foundation teaching, where for 30 or 45 seconds, I'm just going to echo some I play, you play. And again, no longer than 30 or 45 seconds, right? So you're not going to go on for minutes that way. And then I've got the second level where they're learning to count it. And these would be rhythms that last week we were doing, or for 2 weeks prior, we were doing by ear. And maybe those are 16th notes. And now I'm going to spend another 30 or 45 seconds and shift gears and say, hey, everybody, I say you count. Let's check and see, or I count, you count. And now I'm counting 16th notes because we're getting close to seeing those. And then I've got a third group of rhythms that we've been working on longer, that we've been doing by ear and counting. And now it's time for them to see that. So for about a minute, I use Emile in manual mode, and I'm connecting them to those rhythms that they're going to be seeing pretty soon. And then I've got a fourth strata of rhythms that is in test it mode. Like, hey, this piece, like next week, I'm going to be passing out the piece that's got triplets in it. So let's check to make sure that before we get that music in front of them, that they really get this triplet thing figured out. So I've got Emile ready to go in automatic mode. And so we're talking about like 4 minutes of our teaching, but each of those 4 minutes is for a very specific reason. Play it, see, count it, see it, test it. So that's, a minute on each one of those every day. As long as you've got yourself thinking that way, then wow, the front part of class is really, is it interesting? It's engaging. Students are learning. You're getting feedback from what they're understanding. And then the goal is that when you then pass that piece of music out, there's nothing rhythmically that they've never seen before. And gosh, imagine how like insanely fun rehearsals become when all of the rhythmic material in front of them is stuff like, yeah, I got this, we're good. Or like, hey, everybody, can we count measure 7? And they know that because you've been doing with that 3 weeks ago, you were doing that with them. And so, all right, let's count. Okay, great, let's go back. And that's all you have to do. You don't have to start to figure out how this verse, and well, let me explain how eighth note triplets work in relation to level 5. Stop. So what happens then is you end up spending then all of that rehearsal time on much more engaging things. And what we all struggle with is just lack of time.
Yeah.
But so it just takes kind of shifting your brain and thinking about it that way.
What resonates with me with this conversation, this part of the conversation, is the idea that, in the beginning of David's book, he talks about the reason he focused on rhythm was because it enabled the kids to kind of free up their mind space, their head space, to be creative, to play more musically, right?
Right.
And so that to me is a big important part of why, you're talking about spending more time with the technique and everything in the beginning part of a rehearsal, because it gets those things out of the way so that now we can talk about crescendos. And
right. Yeah, that's Scott. I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because that was a big, powerful moment in the book for me as well, as was the related point. And this probably is worth illuminating here for just a moment. David's suggestion is to never have students play a rhythm like I play, you play, and to never demonstrate a rhythm not musically or unmusically. So for instance, da, 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 that you would ask them to echo that back to you. So not just the rhythm, but also the rhythmic direction that is part of, and quite honestly, is this like something that all of our students struggle with? Yeah. This idea that those rhythms lead to, even though there's no crescendo there, it's implied that that's how that goes. Well, imagine if all of your students with just, a minute a day or 2 minutes a day are getting that into their kind of being, their fabric as a musician, where that becomes natural and instinctual. And imagine now you've passed out this music and all of those kinds of things are starting to happen without you having to pull that out of them. Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, now talk about like creative. So the goal is to have enough time spent in those, what I like to call the foundations part of rehearsal, so that the repertoire part of the rehearsal is just a ton of fun, is a ton of going deep into these things that quite honestly, we all hope to spend a lot of time with. but in some cases we don't get to because we're spending time doing the stuff that, you know, well, said differently, skills are best learned out of a context, not in one. And rhythm, pattern, vocabulary expanding exercises, that's not something to do in repertoire, that's something to do out of repertoire, and then apply that in a context. And you can use that framework actually for all of your teaching. So intonation skills and tuning skills should be learned out of a context and then placed in one, so that there's potential for them to transfer to the next setting. Because obviously we don't want our students to just play in tune at measure 12. We want our students to play in tune all the time. Well, teaching that skill is very different than just making measure 12 in tune. I can get measure 12 to be in tune and get that to stick. But what I would hope is then the measure 13 would be in tune as well, and measure 4, and it doesn't automatically transfer.
Yeah.
So context and out of context is pretty huge in teaching, that's for sure.
Yeah, that we got another moment where my mind is kind of being blown, because I've never thought about teaching a rhythm with a dynamic, and no wonder then when I get to rehearsal and it's like so painfully obvious to me that those 16th notes are moving forward, but they're not doing it. So that is another thing that it's going to change my teaching. I love it.
and that's all David, and it's his book. So I got to tell you, for like, I don't know what, I mean, it's not that expensive either. It's like, oh my gosh, it's a gold mine worth of stuff. And for not very much money, it can be great. And I've used it in my teaching. I go back and read it myself. And every time I'm reminded again. I like that word of being reminded, like, oh yeah, that's the teacher I want to be. And I just have to be reminded. And summer is very often when a lot of us do that, right? Figure that out.
Well, I feel like we've kind of hit everything that we wanted to. Is there anything that you want to add here?
No, other than, I'm just grateful for your interest in Emile. And again, Emile is a work in progress. It will always be free. It's one of the ways that I think for those of us who call university teaching our home, it's one of the ways that we can be helping the broader community and basically walking the walk of saying, hey, we are all in this together. So it's going to continue to evolve, and there's a way to provide feedback, and there's questions. Probably every week I get a dozen replies or questions from teachers, and that stuff's really helpful to us, because then when we have the time, we can pull those things out, look at them, and try to make some changes and make the program better for practicing teachers. So yeah, I just really appreciate your interest in that, and it's gratifying to hear that it's helping you in your teaching, and that your students are enjoying it. And at the end of the day, that's the whole reason this thing exists. So thanks for your interest.
I'm excited because tomorrow I'm going to try it for the first time with distance learners and see how.
Oh, awesome!
I haven't done that yet, just because I'm kind of like to compartmentalize, and I need to try it here first, and then I can figure it out and use it more broadly. So.
Yeah, some teachers are also doing some really interesting things with Google Classroom and recording videos like I did on that YouTube video, and using it in testing and having students do some screen recordings and transfer some things back and forth. So you're really kind of only limited by the ways that you can embed this technology within other technologies that you have. It will never be elegant from the perspective of like, hey, will it be able to correct rhythms? Smart music does that well. We don't need another one of those, in essence, that way. It's really designed for like building, again, that rhythmic pattern vocabulary, which is just really central to how independent rhythmic musicians function. That's kind of the slice of pedagogy that we're focusing on. But yeah, it will continue to evolve thanks to the teachers who use it and share what they're learning with their students with us. So
it's a great resource, and so are you, Scott Jones. I appreciate your time, and
right back at you.
Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Bye now.